Imagine living in your parents' house, paying rent every single month, while your brother, who earns more than you, lives there completely free. Sounds unfair, right? Well, that was my life. And believe me, it didn't stop there. Things only got worse from that point. Stay with me till the end, because this story might just change how you see family, fairness, and standing up for yourself. My name's Maggie. I'm a nurse. I work long shifts, often overnight, and still find time to help around the house. My brother, Derek, is a tech consultant who works from home. We both live in our parents' house. The difference? I pay $700 in rent every month. Derek pays nothing. At first, I didn't question it too much. Mom said he was still getting on his feet. Dad just nodded and told me I was doing great, being responsible. I guess they assumed I wouldn't make a fuss. And they were right. I didn't, at least not at first. But things started to feel off. Derek was always eating out, ordering food, or going on weekend trips. He had just bought a shiny new SUV, while I was still driving my beat-up old sedan. I cut coupons, watched every dollar, and packed lunch for work. He didn't even clean up after himself. What made it worse was how our parents acted. They always praised Derek. He's trying, they'd say. He's under a lot of pressure. But no one asked how I was doing. No one noticed when I paid for groceries or helped with bills. I started seeing little things, how Mom would whisper to Derek when I entered the room, or how Dad avoided eye contact when rent was mentioned. Then one night, something happened that changed everything. I had just finished a 12-hour shift and came home to find the kitchen lights still on. I walked in quietly, just wanting a glass of water. That's when I heard their voices. "She doesn't need to know," Derek was saying. Mom replied, "She's always been the stable one. She won't complain. But $700 a month? That's helping us stay afloat." I froze. "She thinks we're being fair," Mom added with a sigh. "But you needed a break. And Maggie, she can handle it." I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked back to my room, heart pounding. My hands were shaking as I closed the door behind me. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a decision. A choice. My parents chose to treat me like the backup plan while Derek got all the benefit. I stared at the ceiling all night, unable to sleep. I kept hearing Derek's smug voice. "She won't complain." They were right. I hadn't complained. But that was about to change. The next few days felt strange. I went through the motions, work, home, sleep. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying that late-night conversation. I tried to convince myself it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Maybe they didn't mean to make me feel used. Maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew better. One Saturday morning, while cleaning out some drawers in the hallway, I found an old folder with copies of Derek's student loan papers. The ones I had co-signed for back when he begged for help after college. Out of curiosity, I looked through them again. My jaw clenched. They were marked paid in full, and not recently either. He'd been debt-free for over a year. So why had he told our parents he was drowning in loans? Later that evening, I brought it up with Mom while she was folding laundry. "Hey Mom, did Derek tell you he's still paying off his student loans?" She didn't even look up. "Yes, of course. That's why we don't ask him for rent. He's under a lot of stress." I took a slow breath. "He paid them off last year. I co-signed them, remember? I got the confirmation notice." She paused for a second, but didn't seem surprised. "Well, maybe he didn't want to worry us. And you've always been the stable one, Maggie. We know you can handle things." There it was again, the stable one. The phrase that was starting to feel more like a curse than a compliment. "Do you know he's the one who suggested I should pay rent?" I asked, watching her reaction closely. She hesitated. "He said it might help keep you focused. That you'd take things more seriously if you had some responsibility." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I left the room and found Derek in the living room, stretched out on the couch with a game controller in his hand. "I know what you told Mom and Dad," I said. He didn't even pause his game. "About what?" "Rent. Student loans. The whole thing." He finally looked at me and smirked. "Maybe if you had better boundaries, you wouldn't get walked on." Something inside me cracked open. Not anger, not yet. Just this sharp, deep understanding that I had let this happen. I had trusted too easily, expected too little. I didn't say anything else. I just turned and walked away. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I opened a blank notebook and started writing down numbers. My savings, my budget, what I could sell, how much extra I could earn by picking up overtime shifts. I didn't have a plan yet, not exactly. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be staying in that house for much longer. And when I left, it would be without looking back. Sunday dinners used to be something I looked forward to. Not because they were warm or joyful. They hadn't been that in years. But because they were routine. Predictable. I knew how they'd go. Dad would talk about the news, Mom would praise Derek's latest big plans, and I'd sit quietly, trying not to feel invisible. But this Sunday was different. Tense. The kind of tense where no one says anything for a few long minutes, then suddenly starts talking too much. Mom had made pot roast, Derek's favorite. I sat across from him and tried to ignore how smug he looked, lounging like he owned the place. We were halfway through dinner when Dad put down his fork and cleared his throat. "Your mother and I have been updating our will," he said casually, like he was telling us about a grocery run. I looked up, surprised. "Oh, yeah," he continued. "We decided the house will go to Derek when we pass. Makes the most sense." My heart stopped for a second. Derek didn't even act surprised. He just kept chewing, then glanced up at me with that same little smirk I'd come to hate. I set down my fork. "Wait, the house? Just to Derek?" Dad nodded, reaching for his glass of iced tea. "You'll be fine, Maggie. You're responsible. You've always made smart decisions. Derek could use the help more." I stared at him. "I paid for the new roof last year." Dad waved a hand like it didn't matter. "And we're grateful, sweetie. But it's just easier this way." I wanted to scream. Not because I wanted the house, I didn't. I had no interest in staying in that place forever, but because it was just another slap in the face. I had poured money into that house, helped take care of it, helped take care of them, and it didn't matter. I looked at Mom. She didn't meet my eyes, just quietly refilled Derek's plate. I looked at Derek. He gave me a little shrug, like this was just how things were. But I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't remind them how many groceries I'd bought, or how many times I'd driven them to appointments, or how much rent I'd paid while Derek freeloaded. I just nodded. "Okay," I said softly. The rest of the dinner went on like nothing happened. Derek talked about some new software he was learning. Mom asked him if he needed help with laundry. Dad turned on the TV in the living room and started watching golf. I went upstairs, shut my door, and sat on the edge of my bed. That was the moment I decided, this will never happen again. Never again would I let someone decide my worth. Never again would I give my time, my money, my care, and be treated like I was just fine. Something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just unfair. It was my wake-up call. After that Sunday dinner, something in me switched off. I didn't fight. I didn't complain. I just became quiet, colder maybe. I started existing like a ghost in that house. I'd wake up before anyone else, work my shifts at the hospital, come home, eat in silence, and disappear into my room. Derek kept doing what Derek always did. He'd borrow my car without asking, leave it with the gas tank empty, sometimes crumbs all over the seat. I never said a word. He assumed I was just tired. He wasn't wrong, I was tired, but not in the way he thought. I picked up extra shifts wherever I could. Weekends, holidays, nights. If someone called in sick, I was the first to volunteer. I didn't spend a dime unless I had to. I stopped buying coffee on the way to work, brought lunch from home, and even started selling things I no longer use. Jewelry I hadn't worn in years, old electronics, extra clothes. I even cashed out a forgotten 401k from a nursing job I'd had right after school. Every paycheck, every side dollar went straight into savings. I watched the number in my bank account grow slowly, then faster. It was the one thing I could control, the one thing that was mine. Then one afternoon I met Eleanor. She was one of my patients, kind, chatty, and sharp as a tack. In her late 70s and recovering from surgery. We got along right away. She reminded me of what a grandmother should feel like. One day, as I helped her to her chair, she mentioned she was selling her house. "I'm moving closer to my grandkids," she said, smiling. "Too many stairs in that old place anyway." I asked where it was, just out of curiosity. When she told me, my ears perked up. It was in a quiet neighborhood just 15 minutes from the hospital. I asked if she had a buyer. "No," she sighed. "Realtors keep telling me to fix it up first. But I just want someone honest to have it. Someone who'll love it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it. Not just the house, but the timing. The way everything had lined up. I had just enough saved. It wouldn't be fancy. It wouldn't be perfect. But it would be mine. A few days later, I asked Eleanor if she'd consider selling it for cash. She looked surprised, but then she smiled. "You?" I nodded. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Then it's yours." And just like that, I bought a house. No mortgage, no loans, no help from anyone. Small. Old. Needed love. But it was mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not Derek. Not Mom. Not Dad. I just went back to work, back to the silence of that house, with a quiet fire burning in my chest. Freedom was coming. It was still dark outside when I stood in the driveway, my breath fogging in the morning air. The U-Haul was packed. Every box, every bag, every little piece of my life I'd carefully saved was loaded and ready. I didn't wake anyone. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. This wasn't a dramatic goodbye. It wasn't meant to be loud or spiteful. It was quiet, final. A clean break. I slipped my house key onto the kitchen counter and took one last look at the home I had lived in for most of my life. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I had outgrown long ago, but had stayed in out of guilt, habit, or some twisted idea of responsibility. Now I was choosing myself. By the time the sun was up, I was already halfway across town, pulling into the cracked driveway of the little house Eleanor had sold me. The paint was chipped. The yard was overgrown. But it didn't matter. It was mine. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. I felt tired, bone-deep tired, but underneath that I felt light, free. A few hours later, as I was carrying in the last of the boxes, my phone buzzed. Derek, where's the car? I stared at the message for a second, then typed back. Gone. Just like your free ride. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't care what he had to say. Inside, the house was still mostly empty. Just boxes and echoes. But it felt different, peaceful. There was no tension here. No footsteps stomping up the stairs. No muffled arguments behind closed doors. No quiet judgment hanging in the air. I ordered takeout and sat cross-legged on the living room floor, eating from a plastic container with a plastic fork. No TV. No distractions. Just me, the sound of the wind outside, and a freedom I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't glamorous. But it was the best meal I'd had in a long, long time. After dinner, I started unpacking. I wasn't in a rush. I had time now. While organizing the closet in the back bedroom, I noticed a loose panel in the wall. Curious, I pried it open and found a small cardboard box tucked inside. Dusty, forgotten. Inside were old papers, receipts, letters, photos. But something caught my eye. A thick manila envelope labeled City Zoning Department. I flipped through the documents. Maps. Letters. A notice about a proposed rezoning plan for the area, dated just a few months ago. If the plan went through, this neighborhood's property values were about to jump, big time. I stared at the papers in disbelief. I hadn't just bought a house. I had bought a future. And suddenly, this move felt bigger than I ever imagined. The next morning, I went through the rest of the box I'd found in the closet. It was filled with the life Eleanor had once lived in this house. Faded photos, old tax returns, handwritten receipts for repairs and paint. She had saved everything, and now it all sat in my hands. At the bottom of the box was the document that made my heart stop. A formal notice from the City Zoning Department. It mentioned a proposal to rezone the area from residential to mixed-use development. That meant one thing: property values were about to jump. Hard. I stared at the envelope, then at the walls of my little house. Peeling paint, cracked windows, crooked doors, and suddenly, all I could see was potential. I hadn't just bought a home. I'd bought gold without knowing it. For the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. I threw myself into the repairs. On my days off from the hospital, I sanded floors, scrubbed walls, patched holes, painted ceiling. It was hard work, and I did most of it alone. But with each brush stroke, I felt like I was scrubbing away pieces of the life I left behind. Neighbors would wave and ask what I was working on. Slowly, I started getting to know them. A retired teacher next door brought me lemonade one afternoon. A young couple across the street lent me their lawnmower. People here were different, quiet, kind, respectful. One evening, I found a flyer on my porch for a local city zoning meeting. I remembered the document Eleanor had kept and decided to go. I sat quietly in the back at first, just listening. But as the weeks went on, I started asking questions, taking notes, showing up early, speaking up. Before I knew it, people began to recognize. You're the nurse who bought Eleanor's house, right? You've done a lot of work. Looks great. One councilwoman even asked if I'd be interested in helping with the neighborhood beautification group. I said yes. Back at home, I kept working. But now, I wasn't just fixing up an old house. I was building something bigger, a life, a future that belonged only to me. Of course, my old life tried to creep back in. My mom left a voicemail. Hi, honey, just checking in. Are you okay? You didn't tell us you were leaving. My dad's voice was in the background, low and annoyed. Tell her we're not mad, just confused. I never called back. Then one afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. I peeked through the curtains. Derek, standing on my porch, hands in his pockets, looking around like he owned the place. I didn't open the door. He knocked again. Waited. Knocked a third time. I stood quietly in the kitchen and listened to the silence after he gave up. I didn't owe him an explanation. This was my home now. My life. And I wasn't going back. It was a cold Tuesday evening when I heard the knock again. Not the polite kind. This one was urgent. Fast. Desperate. I didn't rush to the door. I knew who it was before I even looked. When I finally pulled back the curtain, there he was, Derek. His face was pale, eyes tired, shoulders slumped. The shine he once wore so proudly, his expensive jacket, his perfect haircut, his smug smile, was gone. I opened the door just enough to stand in the frame. I didn't say anything. He exhaled sharply. Hey, Maggie. I didn't respond. He glanced down at his shoes, then back up at me. I lost my job a few months ago. Things haven't been great. I kept my face neutral. I burned through most of my savings, he continued. The market's brutal. I'm trying to find something, but it's been tough. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He shifted uncomfortably. Mom and Dad, they're kind of pissed. They want me to start helping with the bills. The roof's leaking again. Place is falling apart. I almost laughed. The roof I paid for once already. Then he looked at me with that familiar, rehearsed smile, the one he used when he wanted something. I was thinking, maybe I could stay here for a bit, just until I get back on my feet. There it was. The ask. The free ride. I looked at him for a long moment. He seemed smaller now. Not physically, but in energy. The arrogance was gone. What stood in front of me wasn't the golden boy who used to smirk across the dinner table. It was just a man who'd run out of people to use. I tilted my head slightly and said, calm as anything, "You told me I should have had better boundaries." His eyes flickered. "I took your advice," I said, and then I closed the door. No slamming, no shouting, just a gentle click as the lock turned. He stood there for a few seconds, maybe hoping I'd open it again. But I didn't. I stood quietly behind the door and listened as his footsteps slowly faded down the porch. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt. I just felt still. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about getting even. It was about finally choosing myself. He had spent years taking what he wanted, money, space, comfort, and assuming someone else would clean up after him. But not anymore. This time, he'd have to clean up his own mess. And me? I had better things to build. The rezoning passed. Just like that, my quiet little neighborhood became a hot spot for developers and investors. Coffee shops popped up, streets got repaved, and property values skyrocketed almost overnight. I started getting letters in the mail, offers from realtors, handwritten notes from house flippers, even strangers knocking on my door asking if I was willing to sell. One offer stopped me cold. It was a formal letter from a real estate group offering me more than triple what I paid for the house in cash, 6 figures up front. I sat at my kitchen table, holding the letter in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, complete control. Meanwhile, Derek's life was unraveling fast. Word got around that he'd been let go from his second job. A friend of a friend told me he'd borrowed money from just about everyone he knew, and didn't pay any of it back. He'd been crashing on couches, sleeping in his car some nights, burning through whatever bridges he had left. And the house, the one he was promised, it was falling apart. The roof leaked every time it rained. The plumbing was shot. The siding was peeling. He had no money to fix any of it, and our parents weren't in a position to help. They called me one evening, Mom first, then Dad. Back-to-back voicemails. "Maggie, honey, Derek's in a tough spot. He just needs a little help. You know he's not good with money. You've always been the responsible one. Maybe you could just let him stay with you for a while, just until he gets back on track." I didn't call back. The next night, Mom called again. This time, I answered. Her voice was syrupy sweet at first. "Maggie, sweetheart, how's the house?" "It's good," I said simply. "I heard the area's doing well. We're so proud of you." I waited. She sighed. "Look, your brother's going through a hard time. He's made mistakes, but he's still your brother. We were hoping you could." I cut her off gently. "He got the house, remember?" There was silence on the other end. "I'm sure he'll figure it out," I added. And then I hung up. I sat in the quiet afterward, sipping my tea, watching the sun set through my kitchen window. My dog, an old rescue I'd adopted a few months ago, rested at my feet. The air smelled like fresh paint and lavender. The house was warm, clean, and peaceful. No yelling, no guilt, no one expecting me to fix everything. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the fallback plan. I wasn't the one holding everything together while someone else reaped the reward. I was just free, and that was worth more than any 6-figure offer. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind I had only dreamed about in the chaos of my old home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My days were simple. Early morning walks with the dog I adopted from the shelter, long shifts at the hospital, evenings cooking meals in a kitchen that didn't echo with judgment or tension. I named her Penny, my dog. She was an older mutt with kind eyes and a slow, steady way of moving through the world, like she'd seen hard things and survived them. We were alike in that way. The house was still a work in progress, but I loved it more with every nail I hammered and every coat of paint I rolled on. I planted flowers in the front yard, learned how to fix a leaky faucet, and discovered a deep pride in doing things for myself. I started inviting neighbors over, nothing fancy. Just small dinners, coffee on the porch, the occasional potluck. It felt good to be part of something real. No pressure, no roles to play. Just people being kind to one another. One Sunday afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, I nearly teared up. "Eleanor," I said, surprised. She stood there, cane in hand, her face lighting up. I was in town visiting the grandkids and thought I'd stop by. I welcomed her in, gave her a tour of all the changes I'd made. She touched the new cabinets, smiled at the fresh coat of paint in the hallway. "You brought life back into this place," she said softly. "It feels like home again." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, seen. Truly seen. Not as the one who keeps things running, not as the one who sacrifices quietly, but as a person. A woman who built a life on her own terms. Meanwhile, the mess I left behind kept crumbling. I heard from a cousin that Derek had begged our parents to sell him the house, to split the money or help him move somewhere new. But they refused. They couldn't afford to move, and the house was in their name. Plus, they were finally starting to see the cracks in Derek's golden boy image. The roof was still leaking. The furnace was breaking down. The siding was warping. Derek had no savings left, no job steady enough to catch up. He was stuck. I didn't feel spite, just distance. Like I'd finally crossed a bridge and left the storm behind. I never looked back, because I had learned something important. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the neighbor who brings you soup when you're sick, the old woman who trusts you with her home, the dog who curls up beside you like you're her whole world. And sometimes it's just you, finally choosing peace over pain. That, I'd learned, was more than enough. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the sun slid through the curtains just right, warming the kitchen tiles beneath my feet. Penny snored softly by the back door, and the kettle was just starting to whistle. Then came the knock, a hard, frantic knock that didn't belong to neighbors or mailmen. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. Derek. He looked nothing like the smug brother I remembered. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken, and his voice? Strained. "You owe me," he blurted out. No greeting. No shame. I didn't say anything. Just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, waiting for the rest. "You wouldn't even have this house if it weren't for me," he shouted, his voice rising with every word. "You think you're so much better now? You think walking away makes you a hero? You left us. You left me." I didn't flinch. "You're right," I said softly but clearly. "I wouldn't have this house if it weren't for you." He blinked, surprised. "Thank you," I continued, "for being the reminder I needed. That no one is coming to save me. That if I wanted peace, I'd have to build it myself." And I did. I stepped back and gently closed the door. He didn't knock again. Back in the kitchen, I poured my tea and sat at the table. Penny lifted her head and wagged her tail once before settling back into her nap. The house was quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels earned. The sun lit up the walls I had painted myself. The old floor creaked in a way that felt familiar, like the home was alive and happy to see me. And I felt it deep in my chest. Not revenge, not triumph, just freedom. No one was going to guilt me, or use me, or make me feel small for standing on my own. They could keep their broken roof, their empty promises, their idea of family. I had something they'd never understand. Peace. And that, my friends, is how I paid rent so my brother could live free, until I bought my own house in cash and made sure I was never beneath anyone again. What would you have done if you were in Maggie's shoes? Walked away for good or given them another chance? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you're always in the loop.